Hello all, welcome to the show. I'm Gus Gagliardi and this is Fire Code Tech. On Fire Code Tech, we interview fire protection professionals from all different careers and backgrounds in order to provide insight and a resource for those in the field. My goal is to help you become a more informed fire protection professional. Fire Code Tech has interviews with engineers and researchers, fire marshals, and insurance professionals, and highlights topics like codes and standards, engineering systems, professional development, and trending topics in the industry. So if you're someone who wants to know more about fire protection or the fascinating stories of those who are in the field, you're in the right place. Hello all, welcome to episode 29 of Fire Code Tech. In this episode we have Marco Vargas. Marco is a fire suppression designer and contractor who works in the construction industry. Marco gets into everything fire suppression. He has his own firm and he's a NICET Level 3 in water-based systems layout. In this episode, we talk about BIM, constructability, and Marco's fascinating career. I liked talking to Marco because he has great takeaways for how to hustle and how to be an entrepreneur. It was really entertaining for me to talk with Marco as somebody who has pulled himself up by his own merit and his own ability to achieve and really accomplish some cool things. If you're a fire suppression enthusiast or you just want to hear about some good takeaways from professional development about somebody who has done it and made it as a professional, then you're going to love this episode. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode and follow us on social media. Oh, and if you want to give us a 5-star rating review on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it. Let's get into the show. Well, Marco, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Welcome to Fire Code Tech.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So I always like to get started with having people tell a little bit about how they stumbled into fire and life safety. Well, I say stumbled in. Sometimes it's not a stumble, but oftentimes it is. But
in my case, it kind of was a stumble. I started a little bit around 2008, and I was going to school at the time for architectural engineering, but I was also working full time, and I was never one to look into getting student loans or anything like that. So I've just always worked since I was a kid. And so I was working full time, and I just kind of found myself being, stuck in this sort of forever timeline until I finally got my degree and be able to start looking for jobs and all that. So when I was parking cars at the Hilton Hotel in downtown Austin one day, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna start sending out my resumes and put on there, the current student at architectural school looking for, whatever position is available. And I started sending out resumes, and sure enough, I got interviewed and hired with a fire sprinkler company in Austin. And I already knew how to draw on AutoCAD thanks to 3 years of high school drafting, where I kind of got around having to do PE or anything like that by just taking the extended drafting course, which ultimately paid off because it's what I'm doing now. But so for 3 years in high school, I was just messing around on AutoCAD and the one computer that was in the room, and that was enough to sort of, line, draw, copy. The basic commands, I had already sort of learned a lot of the basic commands, and by the time I left high school and started taking college classes and all that, I was showing a lot of. I remember, there was one instance where I showed my professor what a quadrant point was, because he was telling us, to get the endpoint of a line directly on a circle, you got to zoom in, and you got to just keep zooming on in. And it was just so like that.
that's so bad.
Yeah. So my early experience with taking, classes for, you know, uh, computer engineering, I felt like I was already ahead in a way. And not to say that I already knew everything, which when we're young, we tend to think that anyway. But I was aware that I didn't know everything, but I knew enough to how a lot of people say, to make me dangerous. So when I was just going through these classes, I just found myself more and more like bored, because even outside of class, I was always messing on AutoCAD, like just drawing either, logos or just stuff, just messing with it. I enjoyed it. And so that's kind of what led to my frustration, with waiting on finishing school, and just sort of um, pulling the trigger a little bit early, and start sending out resumes, which, I figured the best thing that I could do was say, I don't have a full education yet, but I'm working on it, and, give me a shot, which thankfully, one design manager did. And I kind of, um, got the ball, and how do they say it? Got the ball and
Ran with
went
it.
running and ran with it. There you go. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate that you had some hustle and you were like, I'm not waiting around to finish school. I'm running circles around the teacher, and why would I wait? I think that it's sad. I see in college students, or people involved in secondary education so often, that they want to wait until they're done with college to do what they want to do, and that's really not the way to go about it. At least not in engineering, or in the really probably fire and life safety, or in most fields probably.
in
You
most
know,
fields,
to
I imagine, but especially in fire protection, even if you can get your foot in the door as an admin or something, even if you're just learning about the monthly billings or inspection reports or something, there the industry and the trade is so vast that if you get good knowledge, working knowledge in one aspect, even if it is, understanding of from like an admin position all the way up to engineering. I mean, there's a spot in a fire protection company for pretty much anyone from varying backgrounds.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I feel like fire suppression companies are always hiring. So, I mean, there's a good chance that even if it was only on a trial basis, you could get a stab at an opportunity. If you showed that you were, eager enough, I think there'd be a decent chance.
Yeah, and
And
it's
so,
and it's a lot of the trades, um, a lot of the people who are managers in a lot of the companies that I've worked for, a lot of them aren't college graduates themselves. A lot of them started off as installers. A lot of them started off as inspectors, and it's very humbling to see, when somebody who is just hungry for it, they I don't want to say they fall in love with the trade, but it kind of grabs you, where you realize that there's been this sort of unsung hero of construction that's just sort of been there. Nobody thinks about it really. And but there's just so many opportunities in it that once you learn of it and you're like, okay, I can get specialized in, X, Y, or Z, like whatever you want to specialize in, there's a spot for you in it. So it's very, I enjoy it because some of my early career, after I got hired in Austin, I worked for the a company there for about, I think it was close to 8 months before I moved to Portland, um, just to go up there and follow my girlfriend around at the time, and working up in a company up there, it really kind of opened my eyes to all those possibilities as well. Once I went up there, it was so easy to just kind of, I don't want to say easy, but it was, I didn't have much experience, but I was able to get a job at a sprinkler company, and they gave me another, they gave me a shot, and uh and I just I just continued learning there. And the big thing is just when you make a mistake, you gotta really own up to it and not ever try to put anything off. Because in construction, if you make a mistake and you don't tell anybody about it, you're gonna find out, a month and $20,000 later that you either lied or missed something. So
Yeah, that's a good point. There's not much room for hiding in fire suppression contracting.
yeah,
It really is just abundantly uh, obvious if you make a mistake, if you double order something, or you didn't understand the structure over here, so it doesn't fit. They're gonna find out. there's no
exactly.
more. There's no more kicking the can down the road when they're shoving pipe into a ceiling cavity. So
Pretty much. Yeah.
I definitely know what you're saying there. But that's awesome. I love that exposition about how fire suppression and designing is has such a good advantage for people to find work, and that's something I found as well. A lot of people with no college or little college, or like associate level degrees had come up to really prominent positions in the company, and it was more of a meritocracy instead of somewhere where you had to have a degree to play ball. And
Yeah, and
so I thought that I had that uh, impression as well, if you will.
yeah, and that's what I was getting at when I moved to up to Portland and I worked at that sprinkler company there. I mean, I worked with a great group of both men and women um, up there, but a lot of them not really college educated. A lot of them, I mean, the work that some of these installers would do was just amazing to see. And the uh, president of that company, the owner and president of the company, he was this older guy, and he had grown up in the trade when they were still hanging, uh, 6-inch Schedule 40 pipe and threading it with threaded fittings on there. Like he was old school, and a lot of, and he wasn't college educated either, but um, and I'm not saying that to say that a college education isn't important, but just the admiration that I was able to that I gained for these people who were sort of playing it, playing the song by on a different sort of tune or something. They were just working, and they were getting work done. They were getting good work done, and people were feeding their families, and everything was good, and it just wasn't the mold that I was taught, growing up, where after high school you go to 4 years of college and then you get a job and all this stuff. It's like, no, these guys, they've been hanging pipe, some of them while they were still in high school, and now that guy is the manager of this office or something like that. So it was just very I got a lot of admiration for the trade because it kind of didn't pull any punches from that point of view.
Yeah, that's awesome. One episode I did early on, Chase Brown, he grew up in the trade, and he was talking about how he probably wasn't following labor laws, because his dad had him threading fittings when he was in high school, or before middle school.
Yeah.
Had a bucket of fittings, and he had him putting them together. But yeah, that's funny about growing up in the trade. I like hearing about that. But yeah, so I'd like to hear more about, kind of some of the other roles that you had up until this point in your career. Would you speak a little bit more specifically about, your trajectory after you had that first fire suppression role?
um yeah, so early on, I really they really the training that I got was really emphasized on the stock listing portion of the process. So I learned a lot about fittings and maximum pipe lengths and everything that, and all the valves that you would have to order, all the sprinklers, escutcheon plates, everything that went with it is what they kind of started me on, learning my takeouts, learning, because one of the things that I was taught is, it doesn't matter if you can draw it, you know, but if you can't put it together at an install site, then there's no point. At that point, your drawing is just useless. So that was really important. Um, a really important thing that I learned early on, and so a lot of that um, really kind of bled into the other areas as I was learning design, really sort of applying the available sort of devices that I had to work with, and what worked and what didn't, because ultimately, we're trying to get a plan out to somebody that somebody's going to have to look at and install, from a sheet of paper that you drew. So really focused on a lot of the real world sort of things that you'll find on a job site and what we have to work with. So a lot of the early stuff I did was in stock listing, and then after that I got moved up to system surveying, and then drawing existing systems. So going out to different job sites, trying different things, and on a recent sort of LinkedIn post, I kind of uh, broke down how I do my surveying now. A lot of it's just done, video surveying and finding key points to reference on my plan and all that. But early on, it was pulling multiple dimensions for a single pipe, and especially walking into older buildings where the systems were just, just no typical pieces anywhere, no real sort of pipe schedule to follow. It was, I don't know if you've ever done a whole lot of like retrofit kind of work or tenant finish outs, but
Mm-hmm.
there's some old systems out there that are pretty rough looking, and surveying them and putting an existing system plan from something that looks pretty rough can be challenging. So that was sort of a lot of fun to learn. And early on, since it was early in my career, it was fun to get to put on a hard hat and the whole PPE stuff and go out onto the job site and do the whole, you kind of, you're in it now. You're in the world. You're doing it at that point. So that was really cool to experience. And then got moved on to doing, system remodels, tenant finish outs, learning, just simple things. Hey, one head off one outlet, unless there's two separate offices, then we can get another head for that office, type of things. Really sort of starting to dig a lot more into NFPA 13, which which is mostly what I've been working with for wet or for automatic sprinkler systems. But so as I was learning stock listing and what components are actually involved in the installation of fire sprinkler systems, I was also learning, NFPA 13 on top of that, since I had never even heard of it at that point. So um, and just always kind of, I mean, I fell in love with it. It was something different. It was something that I just kind of, how you said earlier, just kind of like slid right into, and I wasn't even expecting it, but it just kind of happened. And so as I started learning all that, I kind of took because I learned a lot in that short time of the first company that I worked for before I moved up to Portland and worked with a company up there. But taking that small knowledge with me up there was enough to really kind of keep me sort of moving forward and not getting scared and quitting or anything like that. There was always something new to be learned, and it always seemed like the people that I was working with were also always learning something new all the time. So it just it just never felt like um I was done learning, or there was like a sort of end to the possibilities of where you could go. I mean, there's always the end of a project, but I mean, I still haven't done a project that's been the same, and I've been doing this now for over 10 years, and I've done projects where they've said, yeah, we're building the same building, they use the same plans, they just change the title block and all that, and it's still completely different than the last one that we did.
Man,
So
I always joke about typical buildings because they almost never turn out typical.
they're anything
It's
but they're
I
anything
know.
but the front door's in the same spot, but that's about it. Um, and the good thing about the shop where I worked at in Portland was they had their own fabrication shop. So I was now in a world where I could literally say, hey, I need a riser piece, a riser manifold, but I need the weld to come out at this strange angle because it's an old building, and you name it. So I was really able to work closely with the fabrication shop too, which was new to me. And a lot of the companies up in the Pacific Northwest, they tend to run their shops that way. A lot of them won't send their fabrication out to like the big names like Ferguson or Reliable or anything. They just do it in house. So and all that was something I had access to. And sort of the best and worst thing that happened was they gave me a key to the place. That was, the best thing for them. And for me physically, probably not the best, but I was at the office all the time at that point. I was there before anybody got there, just clicking away, um, working on projects, trying to keep everything moving forward, and the last one to leave, working late and all that, because a lot of the learning that I was doing, I really didn't feel like doing it on the clock. I always wanted to be a useful tool in a way when it came to design. So I took a lot of the responsibility of learning how to do the job on my own time, which is something that I unfortunately haven't really seen a whole lot of in newer generations of people that I've worked with.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a hard thing to do, to take that time to learn, whether it be I was always somebody who was looking for the course, was looking for the book, to figure out how to do it, and that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast because I was going crazy trying to figure out how do I learn how to do my job better? How do I get ahead? How do I, how do I close this gap between, what I read out of a code book and what I learned in school? And, and then on the other end of that spectrum, what it means to be a professional, and not just a professional, but an excellent professional, you know. And so I resonate with that, wanting to learn and having the integrity to strive to find that um, just knowledge outside of work. That's something that
Yeah,
had in my career.
and you have to be able to put in that time, and it's hard. I mean, and it was a little bit easy for me at the time. I was younger, and I wasn't married, and so I could see how if somebody either has children or has a big responsibility outside of work, how it could be very, very challenging. But it's not impossible, and I've seen direct comparisons in designers that I've trained, and those who I can just tell, and who's putting in the time outside of work and who isn't. And as a manager, you can't really demand that of people. People have their own lives and they have to live them how they live them. But um, I could just kind of tell who did and who didn't, and the ones that did tended to stick around. So
Yeah, I think it's interesting. At least I've seen it as a professional, whether it's in design or really any aspect of life. Those who are willing to go the extra mile and keep learning and keep competitive. I think I was just talking about this on a pod recently. I think, oh yeah, I was a guest on the pod for the first time recently,
Oh, nice.
and they were asking me what my like big takeaway or big thing to promote would be for other professionals, and I was like, you gotta keep learning, because if you're not learning, you're not even keeping pace with like just the inflation of knowledge and what you're doing.
Yep.
And then if you're not even on top of that note, learning at an accelerated pace, you're not even keeping up with those who are really good at what you're doing. So, like, if you're not, learning at an accelerated pace and trying to be competitive on top of that, you're not in the game. You're not really keeping up at pace with, the people who are going to be the best at what they're doing and make the most money and, have the best knowledge about the whole process.
Exactly. And deep down, I want to say that that was my desire, but most of it was I was just really afraid of my inexperience, and I was being involved in meetings where they're talking about money, and that was the big eye opener for me, because when you first start off and you're just training and just learning and all that stuff, you can get sort of enamored with certain processes and be like, oh look, I can draw something in 3D and it looks like the real thing. But once you start getting into the territory where you're sitting in meetings and they're talking about money and margins and hours and how it's all affecting, and why aren't we at this percentage point when the number of hours that we forecasted should have put us here, like that's when it all becomes real. And that's when I don't care if a designer can draw a fire pump that looks fancy in 3D, or if you give me a wireframe fire pump, if it passes um, you know, review, and if it's code compliant, then boom, if the takeouts are right on your stock list, it doesn't matter at that point. So that was a big sort of eye opening thing for me. Was this is to be a designer doesn't mean all you do is design. You're designing stuff that gets installed, that has other people attached to it, that has money attached to it, that some of it is yours, but not all of it. And everybody still has to, do their job, and everybody else still has to get paid. And that was a big sort of, driving force to me, was if I don't get this stock list out, then, you know, um, I'm going to change his name. But, Bob can't get to, won't be able to go to this job site and work for the week. And then he has to go home, and then he doesn't get paid because I didn't, get the list out in time. So a lot of that was a real big responsibility that I started sort of feeling. And I never really felt it forced on me, but I just really, once I kind of got a big picture of it, um, the role of a designer really kind of, you know, uh, sort of opened me up to all that. So,
Yeah.
um,
Man, that's really powerful. I know exactly what you're talking about, and yeah, like taking a look at the budget and the design hours, and then, having your design manager, ask you what completion point are you at in this design, and, when is this going to be done, and having those frank sort of conversations. And
yeah,
then, yeah, if the foreman and the fitters aren't working, they're not getting paid. So it's that's definitely in your mind as you're
yeah,
designing. And yeah, another good point you had, a couple points I wanted to circle back to, but one of them I just had like flashbacks as you're talking about pump design, and I was just thinking about how the greater margin of certainty you need to have because of like just the way that a pump fits in a design and how immovable it kind of is.
hmm,
And yeah, I don't know, I just remember the first time I was designing a diesel fire pump, and having to set all that up and try to make it work, and just finding all that process so difficult. I was in the role so short of time, I never really got to feel comfortable with a lot of these things you're talking about. Um,
Yeah, and um, for something like that, one quick sort of note of advice that I'll give on that is, you know, a lot of times fabricators, you know, the welds are they can they're pretty consistent, but sometimes they're not 100% precise. So what I started doing a while back, um, and what I would do for any kind of fire pump that you're going to be listing, um, which I mean now they have them on the ready to go slabs where you just kind of connect to one point or the other. But in certain rooms where you have to build it because the door isn't big enough to fit a whole slab in there, I've just started leaving the pieces plain end and cut them long, and then just, you know, leave a bunch of notes on the install plans that say, hey, one of these ends is grooved, and pull your measurement, and here's where we're gonna put the fire pump, and there's where the concrete pad is, but the rest is, you know, and here's where all the valves go. Here's this piece and here's that piece. Actually, you know, labeling the pieces for the install, but just cutting them a little bit longer and leaving one end plain so that they know. So that way, you never get the phone call that says, hey, your piece was too short. We had to go back and get another 21 footer so that we can go back to the job site and cut it right. That way, you know, it's already cut long a little bit. You get your right measurement, cut it to a precise length, and it saves a trip. And, you know, and it also, field installers are also pipe fitters, so there is some fitting involved. In a real perfect world, it would be awesome to be able to send out a complete, you know, stock list with everything ready to go, and they can just, you know, use the impact drill to knock out all the couplings and go home. But unfortunately, like I said, I've never done two jobs that were the same, and none of them have ever not involved some sort of fabrication in the field. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. Another point I wanted to talk about that you mentioned previously was, how to make things fit and how to make, fire sprinkler designs constructible. That was a great pro tip on how to, basically fashion your stock list to where you can have some flexibility. And I'm sure there's just a bunch of tricks of the trade that come with time and, reps. But
mm-hmm,
um, yeah, I'd love to talk more about that idea because I know it's so difficult. Um, you spoke a little bit about, how to make, what do you look for when you're, verifying that, yes, indeed, this design is going to fit, or yes, indeed, that this is a functional design that can be fabricated and can be installed, or maybe what are
mm-hmm.
some common pitfalls would be a better question.
Some common pitfalls that I've seen is it involves a lot of like using like riser nipples off of like your main piping for your branch lines, especially in some like BIM coordination. It tends to happen a lot, and I've seen more um, of those mistakes happen on BIM projects, which has they can have pretty catastrophic snowballing effects. But um, I have seen it to where, you know, there's a designer who's trying to fit a certain, you know, pipe bend or something in the model just to get it to work, but either a fitting with that small of a takeout doesn't exist, or they didn't take into account the additional welded piece that goes on top of your, or on the side, or the outlet that just gets put on your main piping plus the fitting. So really familiarizing yourself with what you have to work with is important, because a lot of the mistakes I've seen have been takeout mistakes where you say, you know, if you got a plan and one elevation for one pipe is at, you know, 10 foot, and then the other pipe is at 10 foot 4, you know that there's no such fitting where I can get that next piece up only 4 inches, because my back to back 90 on a 4 inch piece of pipe, if I use a Firelock fitting, is 8 inches. So that kind of stuff, where if I'm in a BIM meeting and they ask me, hey, can't you move up that line 4 inches? I'll say, no, I can't, because my minimum takeout on that is going to be 8 inches to the center line. So that kind of stuff that really will help sort of protect you from mistakes that can, uh, cost you in the long run. Because say that 4 inches is for a branch line, and then your whole elevation is based on that, and your main elevation is stuck, and then you go to fabricate it, and you'll get a field person asking you, hey, how am I supposed to install this pipe 4 inches from here, when so that kind of stuff really, really, and not being afraid to um to be uncertain about certain pieces. Like if there's a when I'm fabricating, when I'm making fabrication reports, if I'm working on multiple levels, like if it's like a 2-story building or something, and we're going up from one story to another, um, and say it's like a 12-foot sort of difference from one floor up, and there's a connecting piece between the second floor system and the first floor system. Even though I know that if even if I know the elevations, and even if all my plans, and even if I have a perfect building model that says if I cut a piece exactly to 11 foot 8 or whatever, that it's going to fit precisely right where it goes, I'm still going to send out like a 12-foot 6 piece and say, hey, field fab this, just because I don't know exactly if they're going to hang it right at the marker or not. So you have to leave in these sort of tolerances, and and leave some things up to the job foreman, whose job is to review their stock listing, review their plans, and make sure that they tell their installers, hey guys, here's these pieces that we fabbed out long, so that you guys can field cut these to ensure that we have a perfect fit, and it's not going to be either too long or too short or whatever. So a lot of just really familiarizing yourself with what we have to work with, which is mostly pipe and fittings. So straight lines and circles. It's not too complicated, but knowing the limitations will help you avoid a lot of those pitfalls.
That's a great tip there, Marco. Yeah, I think just to add on to your note about tolerances, and everything looks good on paper, but uh, people sometimes don't realize that there are margins for error in pouring concrete, or the way that building steel fits together. So having some of these tolerances or allowances in mind, I'm sure will help keep you out of a sand trap.
Yeah, for sure.
But so I wanted to talk about what you're doing now, Marco. I didn't want to get too far into us speaking, even though I think I've already gotten us in that place, without letting the listeners know about what you're doing now, and to give context about your point of view and where you're coming from. Yeah, would you tell us a little bit about Dogfight Fire?
Yeah, sure. I started Dogfight Fire in June of 2019, after you know being after being a design manager at a company for the previous 3 years. And it just, once you start, going back to kind of like the money thing, which at the end of the day, it's kind of what we're all sort of in the trade for, in a manner of speaking. We all want monetary gain for our knowledge. But once I started seeing how the money was moving through a lot of these companies, and the amount of money that gets charged for design versus what some of the designers make, can be uh, pretty vast, depending on the experience of the designer. Obviously, designers paid what they're worth, but just kind of seeing the bigger picture of being able to say, hey, if I were on my own, I could be able to contract that entire amount for myself, which sounds totally selfish, and I'm aware of that. But um, that's sort of what I kind of started seeing, and not necessarily at the company where I was a design manager for, but I had just kind of seen the trend and just been in enough meetings and seen enough reports to kind of see where I was versus where the company was selling my value for, so using that time, once I kind of figured out that I would eventually want to be on my own, everything in my career has sort of been focused on getting to that point. And there's still, kind of like how we were talking about earlier, always learning. There's still stuff to learn. There's still a lot of stuff to relearn on top of that. There's been, I've been caught up with certain projects where you get so caught up on like a high piled storage code application that you forget simple stuff, and you didn't realize that you overspaced a sprinkler in a couple of rooms or something like that. So relearning a whole lot of things is also, involved, because how you mentioned earlier, again, there's so much to learn and always something to learn. You might relearn something and not realize that you already, went over it once or twice before. So what I started doing with what kind of inspired, me to start Dogfight was to be able to call my own shots, for one, and be a little more selective, and not more selective of who I work with, and not tied down to just one specific company. So that also, I felt, would open me up to more opportunities to work on different kinds of jobs that I found a little more interesting, um, which, you know, isn't always the case. Sometimes you take a job just because it's a business and you're not going to turn away business. So if it's, drawing a bunch of warehouses and you feel like you need to be drawing other stuff, well, until that stuff comes, you draw your warehouses, you keep the lights on. So there's definitely a lot of that involved, but I'm at the helm, and with me in charge, it's all on me. If it fails, it's my fault, and if it succeeds, well, then I'm doing an all right job. So when I did start it, I there's a sort of gray area in the Texas code that there's plenty of freelancers who are working on their own, and they don't have the full Texas license that's in the code. And where I get it from is in the code. It says any kind of planning, inspections, installations, or testing of anything fire sprinkler related, you need to have this license for. So the one that stands out to me is the planning part, which planning to me is designing. So there might be different interpretations and all that out there for it, but I always knew that I wanted to have the legit, protection for it. So I went ahead, and I also, paid for the insurance, which was costly, and and got the license for the company. So as it stands, it's a solely a design firm run by myself, but the the opportunities are there for me to explore inspections, and which is kind of what I feel might be my next venture, and how I choose to expand the company, and not necessarily continue expanding the design portion, but really kind of, I like to get my hands dirty on stuff too. So really, really kind of get out there as well, and eventually the trucks with the employees and all that. But for now, just trying to do the best I can to design the best work that I can for my clients. So, and by doing that is you have to be able to deliver on what you offer. You can't be a baker or call yourself a baker and your cakes are no good. You gotta really sort of wear the hat and do the job right, which is, a big thing to consider for anybody that is thinking that freelancing might be a, an easier way to do it. If anything, it's a little bit more difficult, but there are certain freedoms that you can't sort of replace at all by working at an office or for an employer. So Dogfight has just kind of been me just doing it on my own and trying to kind of see if my boat floats out in this ocean of an industry that we're working in.
That's awesome, man. I love hearing about that. And no, I don't think it's selfish for you to, see the rate that your company pays. And I'm sure now, as a business owner, you realize what all goes in to keep the lights on. But I don't think it's selfish for you to say, hey, here's my value. I might want to try doing this for myself and see how that goes. But
Yeah.
no, I wanted to just, yeah, I really like the explanation about the impetus for Dogfight and kind of what you've been getting into. But so you started Dogfight in, would you tell me before 2019?
Yeah, June 2019.
June 2019. So you've been at it almost 2 years now. And
Getting
so
close. Yes.
getting close to 2 years. And so you told us about like the design stuff, but so do you also stock list and provide those services as well, or is it mostly just the design part of it?
No, I do design and stock listing, design, calc, stock listing, as built, everything that you would need to for, turnkey plans, everything that you would need for permitting. Um and so yeah, I mean, beginning to end, I'm involved in projects, even like with BIM projects, all the way to the end, which it's a little bit difficult, to do sometimes, because with BIM especially, it's you have to work with different teams, and not only are you working on a different project, but different subcontractors, and their BIM people might not be as ahead, or it can get pretty difficult to work on BIM projects and stuff like that. But even on those projects, once they're done, stock listing and permit drawings and installation plans and the full nine.
That's awesome. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about BIM because I see as it's such a huge trend in the industry. And in my brief time as a fire suppression designer, I never was in a job that was like full 3D BIM. I was almost always on the smaller projects. It didn't have this kind of coordination. No, like not very much like I never got to do a high rise or anything like that that would really just absolutely need the 3D BIM coordination. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what are your thoughts on? I've seen you post some funny memes about like coordination meetings, and I know how tense they can get. But what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on BIM and where it's going and your experience with it?
um, from looking at it from a freelance designer standpoint, BIM is always going to be the toughest thing to put a price tag on, um, because the life of the project, even though it's of the portion of the BIM project, even though it's determined by the project schedule, if you are fortunate enough to be working on a job with a project schedule, um, oftentimes, more than often, it goes over that schedule. And a lot of the changes that happen in BIM, uh, you have to anticipate. So it's because it's one thing to sort of look at a set of plans and then put a number on it and say, hey, I can design that for you for whatever X amount of dollars. You wait for the plans to get approved. The field guy takes the plans out and says, hey, we can't hang the main at that elevation. We got to go down a little bit, add fittings here. We got to move this branch line over and then we'll be good. That's one thing. But in BIM, especially if you're working with certain contractors who have uh, meticulous demands. I mean, I've worked with a few general contractors who start asking for separate plans that aren't plans that would be required for permitting process or for stock listing or installation purposes, but they still want them. Say it's like a penetration plan or something, or a certain mock-up of what a 3D rendering of what a riser room would look like, or something like that. That And, just because you can draw that or generate those plans for them doesn't mean it was accounted for in your initial um, estimate. So approaching BIM, and from that regard, is, it's really hard to put a price tag on it, and you always have to anticipate that you're going to be doing a lot of changes for it. I don't want to say for free, but a lot of that, you know, you can ask for a change order, but somebody can easily push it. They're easy to push back on and say, well, hey, it's a BIM project. You knew things were going to change. So, um, as a whole, though, it's pretty good. I don't want to say that BIM has really. It's definitely changed the way things are done, but a lot of times I don't want to sound too negative about it, but more often than not, I work on BIM projects where we're still stuck in coordination, and they're already putting a roof on the dang thing outside of the job trailer. So it tends to get they tend to get drawn out a little bit longer than necessary. And this is just in my experience. And if there are any contractors out there who have a perfect um, schedule, adherence, and all their projects go well, then congratulations to them. But from a freelance standpoint, that's one of the more difficult things to get involved with, especially if you are in a heavily involved BIM project and you also have other contracts that are coming up. Because again, you have demanding contractors who might say, "Hey, we need you to change this, and we need the changes done, and your new model uploaded by tomorrow morning, or by the end of the week, because for the next meeting." And so there's a lot involved in it, and the results from what I've seen are, they're fairly good if what truly was BIM is what gets built. You were talking a little bit ago about how there might be different pore depths in concrete, or how certain structural elements sit on one another. But I recently, let's see, 3 BIM projects ago, finished one. It was the most smoothly run BIM project I had ever been a part of. We were done right on time and everything. It was great. It just turns out that they built a completely different building with a completely different structural framing, but they said we modeled to a building that was very close to the new building they were going to build. So, like, that kind of stuff that can come up where you have these decisions made for, hey, let's just BIM it to where, we're close enough, and there's still field changes required, which at that point now it's just a waste of money, because there's no point in BIMing something if field changes are going to have to be constantly made. And there's a lot of the design build stuff going on now, to where a lot of these companies who are um, building, big projects, especially in Austin, there's a lot of software companies moving, and a lot of them have very deep pockets, and a lot of them don't care how much stuff costs. And so when you do decide to get involved in a BIM project, you could be involved for many, 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 many months. And it can get very tricky to make sure that you're still getting paid properly, and and still putting out everything that they're demanding from you. So, and then on top of that, hoping that there aren't going to be a bunch of field changes that happen, or if an architect changes their mind and you've already finished a certain portion of a BIM project and you're maybe halfway through the stock listing, but they come back and say, hey, they got rid of those ceilings, now they're going to put uprights, and then they demand that you upload a new model, with the changes. And so there's a lot of that kind of interruption that goes on, and a lot of changes made after the fact, when it comes to those projects, and with BIM involved. So I think it would be much better if BIM was planned way before even ground was broken on a lot of these projects. But that's in a perfect world, and we both know that buildings don't get built that way anymore. So usually you're still coordinating while the as soon as as soon as the slab is getting poured, you're still in coordination. So that's where I
Yeah.
kind of feel it's all going.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. From the beginning of your career to now, would you say that you've seen an increase in BIM projects?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why I've sort of been switching more to Revit. I was mostly using AutoCAD and the HydroCAD extension for that, but I have recently made the switch over to Revit just because it's so much easier to work on, like in a 3D platform when you are going to be BIM coordinating something, and especially with kind of like what I just talked about, with so many changes that are constantly happening, to continually go back into a 2D drawing and then render a 3D model based on those elevations every single time is, it gets a little bit time consuming, and again, time is money. So the I found the best way, especially I decided after this past BIM project that I did, that I was going to make the switch to Revit just because um, it's so demanding from a schedule standpoint now, that you need to be able to generate your work quick, and a lot of the functions in HydroCAD, um, from to go from 2D to 3D, a lot of the things have to be really perfect in the drawing for you to generate your model. So it gets very time consuming if you have to move something just like 1 inch over. Say if it's a main, you got to move it over 1 inch. It just it's a lot of work to do for such a little difference in the drawing. So
Yeah, I hear you, man. I know from when I used HydroCAD when I was a fire suppression designer, and God, I'm sure I was a nightmare for my design manager. Like the fact that you'd have to have all your endpoints connecting, and if you didn't get everything connected just so that it wouldn't list and or it wouldn't, like do some of these automatic functions that you really needed to do to save you time, and he would just, end up deleting swaths of design just so he could do it quickly over so it would list correctly, for a young designer trying to figure it out. So I
yeah,
imagine that's infuriating when you're under the gun for a deadline.
yeah. So making the switch to Revit, I mean, I'm still. That's why there's been such a big delay in my uploads on YouTube. Is I'm still trying to learn it, and if I do make a video on it, I was thinking about maybe making a video series on me actually learning, how to use Revit or HydroCAD Revit, but I'm just not at a point to where I'm comfortable enough to even, it's just going to be somebody watching me hover my mouse over all the different icons and seeing the pop-up window that comes up to see what the command is. But so I'm waiting to get to a point to where I can actually work with it very well, and continue my videos with just primarily focused on Revit, which is, it seems to be most of the messages that I've received for my YouTube channel have been for requests on working with HydroCAD Revit. So it seems like as an industry, that's kind of where the HydroCAD side is going to. There's other software that's just completely doing their own thing, but from the HydroCAD AutoCAD standpoint, that's where things seem to be going, is to Revit.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit more about and end on see what you've been doing with YouTube, and on that note, I think you should start now because I think that some of the things that you learn now you're gonna forget by the time that you think you're good enough to record, and that I liked watching your videos just of you like going through stuff and like going through some of the rote tasks. I think you gotta just start. I don't know, man. This the thing about content. I feel like is it's not that everything doesn't have to be the best thing you ever did and extremely crisp and clean and of course so we want to be that way, but it's important for you, and there's like not very much if any content out there on that subject, and so it's important for people like you who have the knowledge and the technical ability to do so. And I mean, I would watch it, and I don't even do any design for. So what does that tell you?
Well,
People who
I
don't
appreciate that.
even touch what you're doing would watch it. Like, I find it interesting. Like, I learn watching it. So I think you got to just dive in, man.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I'll definitely do that now that you mention it, and go through some of the training stuff that I've been working on to get it going. But yeah, and with the YouTube, I mean, that's just me after working in this trade for so many years and coming across and learning, coming across a bunch of different designers and learning so many things. Um, there's I guess one thing that I will sort of want to leave on is my biggest sort of passion, once I kind of felt like I knew what the heck I was doing, was to train new designers into to bring on, because I as a design manager, I kept having, the unfortunate sort of task of hiring and firing designers that were kind of doing the round robin type thing, where they'd leave one company for 50 cents more at another one, or they would leave another one after a project didn't, wasn't being installed the way they drew it, and stuff was hitting the fan. So there was a lot of the same names just continually coming up, and I was just sort of very frustrated from that. And so while I was the design manager, I had the fortunate sort of uh, freedom to sort of pick and choose who I hired, and after getting approval to hire a design trainee, I really started implementing a lot of what I learned early on, um, to the new people, and to help them, become successful in the trade. And the YouTube is sort of my way of still continuing to do that, because when I was a design manager, I kept us all in an open office, like in a big open office, and I was there, with everybody, and I ran a projector on the wall. And sometimes I'd be like, "Hey guys, check this out," or share somebody's screen who was having a problem, and we would all kind of figure it out together. Or sometimes I would just be like, "Look at this hilarious YouTube video that I found," and so, just to kind of like keep the vibe up and all that. But um, training was a big passion of mine, and bringing on new fresh blood was just something that I really felt the industry needed. More people that aren't familiar with it, that can sort of pick something new up and go with it. And I also feel like it would really balance out a lot of the workforce, and sort of overall, as the construction industry grows, it sort of it balances things out, like monetarily as well, bringing in, new people, and you sort of weed out these people who are getting paid overpaid, in some aspects, who have these bad habits, who might have the credentials, but maybe they've just learned a lot of things that I don't want to necessarily say are the wrong way, but um, are ways that don't necessarily jive well with how the company you're working for, or if you're freelancing, how they would work with you. So YouTube has sort of been my way of kind of, you know, continuing to do and to teach how I taught, because it's not necessarily meant to be a tutorial YouTube channel or anything like that. It's mostly if you were just kind of sitting in the office with me the way my designers would, and I pull up my the monitor on the wall through the projector, and show you how I'm doing stuff. And there's a lot of people that are very protective in the trade with their design sort of quote unquote secrets. But I mean, you can get a professional plumber's tool bag, but it doesn't make you a professional plumber, Um, so I don't care. Here's all my secrets. Here's how I do everything. Just please, let's get new people in the trade, So that's my whole thing is let's get some fresh blood in here.
That's awesome. Well, Marco, I think that's an awesome way to end it. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed it. We didn't get to all our questions. I'd love to have you on in the future and follow it up. It's been easy and awesome. Thanks again, Marco.
I really appreciate it, Gus, and anytime I'm here for you.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Be sure to share the episode with a friend if you enjoyed it. Don't forget that fire protection and life safety is serious business. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are by no means a professional consultation or a codes and standards interpretation. Be sure to contact a licensed professional if you are getting involved with fire protection and or life safety. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.